This is the Construction Leading Edge podcast with Todd DeWalt, providing the tools and resources to grow your leadership skills, grow your business, and grow your income. Now let's get started. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the podcast. This is episode 14, and I have a question for you. Have you ever heard of IPD, Integrated Project Delivery? Have you heard of lean construction or lean design? Well, today we have an interview with Dan Heinemeier of the Lean Construction Institute, and he's going to talk about lean design and lean construction, talk about IPD a little bit, and some innovative things that his organization is working on in the way of delivering construction projects. A little bit about the Lean Construction Institute. The LCI is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1997. The Institute operates as a catalyst to transform the industry through lean project delivery using an operating system centered on a common language, fundamental principles, and basic practices. If that sounds like marketing jargon, then don't worry, we're going to get into some practical details and some real-life examples in the interview. LCI's vision, or the Lean Construction Institute's vision, is to transform the design and construction industry supply chain to provide value and enable other industries through lean and integrated approaches. It's good stuff. This is a very informative interview. I learned a lot, and I think you'll learn a lot as well. Stay tuned until the end of the episode. There are a couple of things that I'm going to offer to you and let you know about. One is a free resource that I put together about lean construction, and there'll be a link there that I'll share with you where you can download a free resource guide on lean construction. And then the other thing that I want to talk about at the end of the episode will help people who are still tracking their hourly employees using paper or spreadsheets or some other archaic method. If you're like me, a few years ago, I was dealing with tracking 30 employees using paper timesheets, and it was driving me crazy. So I want to talk about a service that I use and endorse, and I'll give you some more details on that at the end of the episode. But let's go ahead and get started and get into the interview. And Dan, welcome this afternoon. Thank you for joining us on the Construction Leading Edge podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great. Well, let's just get started. I have several questions for you. Tell us, what is lean design and construction, and where did it originate from?
Well, lean design and construction is a structured set of processes and tools that have been developed over many years aimed at reducing waste and enhancing value for clients. So that's kind of our twin pillars of what we're about: value increases and reduction of waste. Where it came from can be traced back to the 90s, actually, when a couple of individuals who formed LCI originally, Glenn Ballard and Greg Howell, were involved as consultants with the industry, trying to help companies understand why the industry was not more productive. Historically, many of your listeners may know, construction is about 54% productive in terms of, in any given week, about 54% of the tasks that have been assigned and programmed actually get completed effectively. So it's really a terribly inefficient industry in many ways, and it just lends itself to a desire on many people's part to try to improve that efficiency. So again, Glenn Ballard and Greg Howell started out back in the 90s and before doing studies for the industry on how they could be more productive using photographic equipment and other tools. And over time, they developed a thought process coming to some extent out of the Toyota production systems and the lean manufacturing world. How could we apply some of those lean tools and techniques to construction in a way that would markedly begin to improve productivity? So eventually they started LCI, or the precursor organization to LCI, which was a think tank, and that over time morphed into a membership-based organization that is now the Lean Construction Institute.
That's a perfect segue into my next question. Tell us about your organization, what it's about, and really what your job is as the executive director.
Sure. LCI is a membership-based organization. We have about 120 companies now, and it runs the gamut from owners to designers to general contractors and trades organizations. And we're in business to propagate knowledge about lean design and construction, encourage people to adopt the tools and techniques that they can use to be effective with lean, and create learning and networking opportunities to help this set of tools catch on around the country. So we do that in several ways. We have an education effort in which we're developing training materials. We have a research effort in which we're looking to work with academia to understand how basic research in construction can be developed into applied research to benefit the lean discipline. We have a committee focused on our communities of practice. We have a kind of a chapter structure around the country with a couple of dozen communities of practice in the major construction and design markets around the country. And those folks are a bunch of volunteers getting together monthly or quarterly to learn more about lean and interact with each other to help their companies get better at it. We talk about companies undertaking a lean journey. It's not a destination. It's really a thought process, a new way to do business in which you're constantly trying to improve. And it really is a journey. And by interacting with other people on that journey, you can learn from them and get better faster.
Great. So if people want to find out more about your organization, they can go to leanconstruction.org. Is that the best place for them to go?
That's right. That's our website. And there's plenty of information there about lean and about the ways you can plug in if you desire to do so around the country.
Perfect. And I'll put a link to that site in the show notes that can be found at constructionleadingedge.com/014. That's for episode 14. So let's get back to the concept of lean design and construction. Dan, tell us, what are some of the key elements in this approach?
Okay, lean came out of what you'd consider to be, I guess, the scientific method of plan, do, check, and adjust, and a variety of tools that emanated from that, trying to understand how you can continuously improve and derive new ways of acting by addressing constraints in different ways. So plan, do, check, adjust from the scientific method is very much a part of the thought process. We also have something called A3 reports, which get generated on 11 by 17 sheets of paper. And these are simply structured ways of looking at business and process challenges, laying out what the problem is and what the solution set is and why. So it helps people in a collaborative fashion come together and solve problems and capture why those solutions were the best solutions. We also advocate value stream mapping. Value stream mapping, as is done in manufacturing, is simply a process of understanding how your vendors, your trade partners, your others bring value to your job through the process of what they do and how you interact with them. And then through that process mapping, try to understand how you can improve the processes, make them more efficient, less wasteful, and more effective for all the players. We also encourage something called target value design, in which we try to get designers from the very beginning of thinking about designs for a project, working with their counterparts in the construction industry, major trade partners and vendors, and those who are doing estimating for projects, getting them involved very early on so that instead of estimating based on detailed designs, you begin to design based on more detailed estimates. And you keep the cost targets in mind very much with interaction from the owner, interaction from the constructors to help understand what would be the cost that results from particular design choices. And that constant interaction with constructors and with others helps the designers be less wasteful in terms of generating fewer designs, but also generating designs that are going to be affordable for the ultimate client. So that's target value design. And the final tool I'll mention is something called Last Planner. And the Last Planner technique is something that was really created by Ballard and Howell when they started off with LCI. And it's really a concept of smoothing out workflow, ultimately. It's a concept for encouraging participants to be much more collaborative on the work site, taking a structured approach to understanding and believing that everybody who comes on the site to do productive work has a lot to offer in terms of how we can work together more effectively, how we can look at the percentage planned completion of the tasks on a weekly basis, and understand the constraints to why we aren't being more productive, eliminate those constraints, and continuously improve. So it's a structured process for improvement across the board for project work. Gotcha.
All right, I want to dig into several of these. There's lots and lots of information there, but a few I'd like to really drill down on, Dan. One is, the first one you mentioned is the plan, do, check, adjust approach, which is all about continuous improvement. So let's dig into that a little bit and come up with kind of a real world example on let's say, if I throw out an example, let's say we're doing a somewhat repetitive project where we're finishing out, we have a senior living community, for example, a multi-dwelling unit project that has 50 units on it, where we're finishing out 50 kitchens, 50 to 100 restrooms, those sorts of things. Tell us about how we can use this plan, do, check, adjust approach in a project like that.
Right. Well, assuming, let's say you're using Last Planner as a system for project performance, and that emphasizes brief daily check-ins for the foreman and all the folks heading up what's going on in a project in a particular point in time, and also weekly check-ins, which might be somewhat longer. You might do a daily check-in for 15 minutes and a weekly check-in for up to an hour, just to understand what have been the constraints to completing this project in terms of trying to get our tasks done on a weekly basis. And once you identify a constraint, let's say it's an equipment issue, let's say it's, maybe it's even weather related, who knows. But you plan around and investigate the cause of a condition that's impeding your productivity, and then you create, in the planning cycle, what might be a way to address that. Then you implement that particular solution, and you perform a test. You see if it's working or not. You check the results of that test, and then you adjust. If it seems to be something that's effectively addressing the constraint, then you probably do more of that. If not, you try to understand, well, why didn't it fix the problem, and what can we do to fix that problem? And as you do this, you begin to get more and more productive because you're reducing waste, you're reducing constraints to getting your job done on the work site, either for a trades partner, for whomever else is performing at that particular time on the site.
Well, let me give an example, and you tell me if this is applicable. Let's say I take the senior living community example, and let's say our problem is we need to get material from the ground floor distributed throughout the building, and we have one freight elevator. Mm-hmm. And the problem is we have drywall contractors, electrical, mechanical, plumbing, pipe fitters, trim carpenters, all at all different phases of the project using one freight elevator. So we identify the constraint as the freight elevator. We need to get materials, well, more generally, getting materials from the truck to the unit. You identify that, and you come up with some plans to say, let's come up with for example, a freight elevator schedule that is before and after normal working hours or something like that. Then you check in, a week or two later with the involved parties, these contractors that are affected, see how things are doing. I would assume you need to come up with some sort of a metric so it's not just qualitative feedback, and then adjust, maybe not just put this plan in place and forget about it, but put the plan in place, then check and see how it's working and go back through another iteration if necessary. Does that sound right?
That sounds exactly right. And you're right. You'd want to come up with metrics to understand whether what you're trying to achieve is being achieved or not. And if the rescheduling of the elevator worked, then you'd maintain that. And if it didn't work, then you'd look at, do we need to bite the bullet and get another elevator going, or can we stage work in a different way, to make that happen?
Gotcha. So what I'm hearing is really using constraint management to find the potential log jams that will mess things up and really focus energy on those constraints. Is that? Exactly.
And, if you're doing this right, you'll typically find that you may have extraordinarily low productivity at the beginning, but as you consistently address those constraints, your 30 or 40% productivity numbers on a weekly basis are going to climb. And the goal is to get to obviously 80 or 90%. And there's two things you don't want to do. You don't want to stagnate at the lower level, but you also don't want to get to 100% consistently, because that means you're not setting stretch goals for yourself. You're just laying back on your oars in some way. So
I see.
Both extremes are not considered helpful. You want to consistently be achieving 80s and 90s and moving ahead, but not necessarily make it too easy for yourself, if you will.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about value stream mapping. Can you give us some more details on what that looks like?
Okay, it's a structured process whereby a team can kind of explore and work together to document the current state of how an operation might be performed, and then look towards a future state where it could be improved. So you'd want to start by identifying either a deliverable or a target product, and then you draw the current value stream map of how that's laid out. How's it actually taking place in terms of flows? So you'd show current steps. You might look at things that are delaying it, information flows that you need to improve in that process, and then by assessing that current state, you can begin to brainstorm on ways to draw a future state that would be better in terms of productivity, waste reduction, and then you begin to look at ways to implement that future state, and again, you go back and assess it and see how that's working.
Sure. So this process, this approach, could also be used for the flow of information as well, correct?
Yes.
Especially with dealing with RFIs, submittals, contract drawing adjustments, things of that nature, which that may be, in a lot of cases, that would be the low-hanging fruit that you could attack and then ease into some of the more complicated processes as far as the construction goes. The other one I wanted two more I wanted to drill down into is you mentioned target value design. Now this is going to be somewhat revolutionary to some of us that have come up through the old school. You said that detailed designs are typically done and then estimates are made and the nary do the two meet in some cases. And what you're proposing is that designs can be completed based on detailed estimates to make sure that the design meets an estimate that meets the budget that was put together when the project was conceived. Now, that's revolutionary and it's brilliant. It seems intuitive, but is this a challenge?
Well, it's a huge challenge, and it's particularly challenging because it sort of hits the designer head on with a major change to the way he or she's used to working on projects, and begins to encourage them to think about letting people in on their conversations and their design approach, who typically wouldn't be involved in that until the design's largely complete and handed off. So it's a real mindset change. But if you work with the proper team that is engaged in looking at optimizing the whole project, it actually can free up more revenue to support better designs, as opposed to being looked at as simply a way to hammer costs down in the design phase. That's really not the intent. It's to reduce things like unnecessary drawings that reduce costs and therefore allow you to put more money into the actual productive designs themselves. Sure.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense because ultimately the goal of the design and the goal of the designers and the builders is to have a successful project, and the owners for that matter. And as long as everyone's pulling in the same way, then shouldn't be an issue. The last thing I wanted to talk about is the fifth element, the last planner. Tell us what are some elements of the last planner that we could put into play on our projects tomorrow?
Okay. Well, last planner very much depends on taking a very collaborative approach, as we've been discussing right along here, to the individual tasks on a project. It's all about smoothing out workflow. So ideally, what you want to start with is a plan or a process towards developing a plan based on major milestones or phases. So as a team, you might, for instance, put up on a wall or on a whiteboard on the far right-hand side, the major milestone or project, anything from final delivery to the owner to some other individual milestone within the project itself. And then from that end result or that deliverable, you plan to the left, backwards, what's the next set of processes that have to occur to make that result happen? And what's the task that has to occur for that team that's going to provide that next set of processes to be able to start and finish their work on time. So you consistently, working as a team, work backwards, and you develop this so-called pull plan schedule, and you negotiate it. You look at it and you say, well, okay, so the plumber's got to hand off to the drywall contractor. How long is your task going to take so that you can reliably hand off to the next guy? And all of this negotiation, all these discussions occur working backwards and developing this plan. And it's typically done on stickies on a whiteboard or on a wall. And you can move these things around and you can negotiate timing and whatnot. It just allows the team to take a much more structured approach to trying to understand their constraints, trying to understand how they can work together better, and ultimately optimizing performance at the project level, not at the individual function level. So much of project work tends to be, I'm a particular trade contractor. My goal is to get in and out as fast as I can, get my job done, and if it affects somebody else adversely, I can't help that. I'm just going to move on. This approach, conversely, asks people to talk about how they can avoid being constraints to each other, how they can make reliable promises to each other, and how they can hand things off in a flow, in a much more positive flow to each other. And that's what makes projects much more successful in terms of cost, schedule, and quality.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing, some of the changes or some of the mindset shifts that have to happen when we look at using lean design and construction is that it sounds like we need to look at our projects as a process and look at it as a workflow instead of some sort of a random series of events that maybe we have control over, maybe we don't, but we need to look at it more from an industrial or a manufacturing type approach where we're producing widgets and we can have consistent results. So we need to change and look at projects as a workflow and a process, and then start focusing on constraints proactively rather than trying to react to problems after they happen.
Right. And in order to get to the point where you can make reliable promises to each other, you've got to build trust. You've got to build a much stronger collaborative team than would necessarily be the case on some projects. So you're really empowering people to not only make decisions, but provide meaningful input to each other. We talk about with every pair of hands, you get a free brain on the job site. So you want to utilize people and have their expertise work for you in terms of saying, well, if you just allowed me to delay a day or two, get this other guy ahead of me, I can be much more productive and I can make up a lot more time and do a much higher quality job. And if you're not listening to people, if you're not encouraging their input, it's very difficult to get that kind of information out of them.
Yeah, that is what you're proposing is a serious paradigm shift from the old command and control. General contractor makes the schedule, general contractor drives everyone, but the old school methodology doesn't deliver the results that lean design and construction projects are delivering. Would you agree with that?
You're exactly right, Todd. And one of the challenges we face is constantly coming up against the soft barriers, not barriers that come from material or even processes, but from people's mindsets that says, I'm the superintendent. I'm gonna say what's happening on this job site and when. That's how I succeed for 20 years. Don't tell me I need to try this touchy-feely stuff where I have to let everybody have a say. So getting over those mindset hurdles is a big part of it. It really is.
So what have you found to be, what's behind that? What's the psychology, or better yet, what have you found to be successful in addressing that mindset, the changed, not only behavior, but the mindset that has to change?
Well, a lot of it is the commitment of the company itself to try to work better and to do a better job and improve their project performance. In most cases, you can find at least one superintendent who's willing to try something new, hopefully. And you'll rapidly find over time, if you're really assiduously applying these tools and techniques, work gets done more efficiently. Cost, quality, and schedule issues are all improved. Safety is improved. And there becomes some fairly bright line changes between the way the company performs on other projects and their lean work, and that just sort of encourages people to get on board. It's really encouraging to me when I hear, and I've heard many times, of a superintendent say, I thought this stuff was just a bunch of hogwash. I didn't want to deal with it. I was convinced I knew how to do this stuff because I've been doing it for 20 years, and I didn't want to hear a better way. When I did implement it, all of a sudden I'm finding we all work as a team much better. I go home at night without my stomach in knots. I don't have to fight with people to get their jobs done. And it's just made me want to stick with this industry longer than I otherwise would have. So you don't have to hear that more than a couple of times when you start to feel like there's really something to this stuff. It really works.
Yeah, definitely.
Exciting.
Well, we've talked a little bit about the strategy and the mindset. Tell me, what are the problems that this approach solves?
Workflow optimization is amazing in the sense that it really drives you from the 50s and 60s level of percentage of plan completion up to a much higher range. And the benefits are exhibited in schedule benefits. You can complete projects sooner. They're less costly. The safety improves. So all of those issues are benefited by taking a lean approach.
Let's talk about the benefits of the lean approach. Let's start with the project owner. What are the benefits to them?
I've been fortunate in having about 3 or 4 owners on our board of directors, so it's been a great opportunity to work with them and hear from them what some of the benefits of lean are. And basically, they, in many cases, are really convinced this is the way to go because they're able to realize projects being completed on or under budget, better safety, better value decisions, more predictable outcomes, which is critical to most owners. And just like in my example with the superintendent, particularly one of our board members says it's just been great to go home without headaches or stomach aches that emanate from having to fight with project participants to get the job done. So they just realize a lot of value and not having to struggle all the time with some of the basic performance issues that go with the business in many cases.
Sure. What about our friends in the design industry, the architects, structural engineers, and MEP designers?
Mm-hmm. They can experience, again, there are a lot of benefits to enhanced teamwork, but they have the opportunity through target value design and other tools to achieve better designs and to be able to achieve better customer satisfaction, which is, of course, going to be critical if they want repeat business. So it can really help them in regard to their ability to meet owners' conditions of satisfaction on a schedule and on budget.
Sure. Next, what about the construction managers and general contractors? What are the benefits to them?
It's hugely beneficial in terms of creating a much more efficient structure for performance on projects, and if they do it right and get their trade partners engaged, it can be really some tremendous outcomes in terms of reducing waste, becoming more efficient, and again, completing projects on a shorter schedule than would otherwise be the case.
What about a little further down the line, the subcontractors and the suppliers? What's in it for? Subcontractors, I can see the benefit. What's in it for the material suppliers, the drywall suppliers, structural steel fabricators, and the like? Right.
Well, to the extent that they're brought in on the approach, they also get an opportunity to provide input on how to make the work flow better in terms of their particular functions and the things that they're delivering. So it creates the potential for them to be able to be more productive, less wasteful, devote their resources to other projects because they're not having to wait, they're not having to stage material in an inefficient way on site and that kind of thing.
Perfect.
Really great for the trade partners too, because it takes a while for these guys to actually be convinced that this is real. But once they open up and they provide a wealth of knowledge for how to make projects much more efficient and how they can work together more effectively with GC representatives as well as other trade partners.
Dan, I can see on the second project after they've been through this process once, start to finish, where there would be some benefits and there could be some cost savings, and especially to a subcontractor who's going through this for the first time. But what about how do you get people over the hump on that first project?
Right. Well, there's a related issue here that I'll address here in a moment as well. But I think it really emanates from either the owner or the GC representative or both, setting the tone and being very serious about maintaining a lean approach to soliciting people's views, getting them engaged in the process, and making them, encouraging them to provide input. And ultimately, the team will make them feel responsible to provide input to optimize the whole project. There's a certain amount of peer pressure that comes into play too when you first start the process. As a trade partner, you might want to sit on your hands and be as non-committal as you can be, because historically that's the way you kept yourself out of trouble. But over time, as the rest of the team is interacting and offering suggestions, and it becomes clear that your inability or unwillingness to participate is creating constraints for other people, it drives folks to open up and be more active and engaged. So there's a certain amount of peer pressure that helps too on job sites. And it's
interesting.
It's a learning function. It's not something that comes naturally. That's true.
Sure. Definitely, it's an entirely different paradigm for putting together a project team than just putting something out on the street and saying, hey, give me your best price on a lean construction project. So sounds like a whole different mindset from top to bottom. Let's talk about the different types of projects, different sizes of projects, which are more appropriate and which may not be appropriate. So if people that are listening are like me, they're thinking, all right, here are the projects that I have coming up. Which ones would be good candidates for this? Sure. So let's start with, are there projects that just aren't suitable for this method, either because of their size, schedule, or the state that the situation that the project is in currently? Sure.
We really focus the most on major capital projects because that's where the biggest bang for the buck is in terms of productivity, and the more complex processes and procedures on the project site lend themselves to more of a lean approach. You could use lean on stick-built houses. You could use lean on almost any project that is months rather than weeks in duration, and in which you want to instill a collaborative team approach to building. But our focus, again, is on the major capital projects because that seems to be where the big bang for the buck is, and our ability to interact with major owners and others to try to move the whole process forward in terms of acceptance around the country is really where we're putting our major emphasis.
Sure. What about contracts? Does this approach require a different type of contract than, say, the typical AIA contract, or if someone does municipal type work, the EJCDC project contract? Is there a specific contract that we should look at for this?
Great question. There are contract forms that are available. There's an organization that has kind of an open systems approach to developing contracts called Consensus Docs. We're part of that along with dozens of other organizations, and there's a Series 300, I believe it is, in Consensus Docs that is a kind of a good template if you want to pick a contract that would be your best approach to try to implement. But having said that, you can use lean on any kind of a project in terms of contract form. We are completely agnostic as a set of techniques, but I will say that the more collaborative a particular contract form is in terms of encouraging collaboration, the more success you're probably going to have in using lean. You can use lean under design bid build, but because it's such a structured contractual form, it would probably depend on a particular general contractor deciding to use it, or even a particular major trade partner deciding to use it within their particular purview, as opposed to trying to necessarily drive it soup to nuts from design through delivery. But you can use it on any contract form. And as you get to design build and IPD and other collaborative forms, it works best. But you can certainly make use of it even in a more restricted contract environment.
Sure. It sounds like what I'm hearing is, even if you were 30% into a typical design, bid, build contract, hard bid approach with the typical owner, designer, contractor triangle setup, you could still implement the plan, do, check, adjust approach with your subcontractors and suppliers. You can still use you can always use more collaboration, implementing some of the last planner approaches. Because what I've found is that subcontractors and suppliers are all about streamlining, and if they'll figure out that a general contractor will help them work faster and reduce their delays and reduce their time on the job, they realize that that general contractor is driving them to make more money. So even what I'm hearing is just because you're in the middle of a project, don't feel like we have to wait until the next contract comes up to implement some of these strategies.
Absolutely, I think you've got it, and it's also, I think, for the trade partners who are in the know about lean, it becomes, particularly in this environment where it's increasingly difficult to get skilled trades because the economy is picking up across the country. It's one of the discriminators for, do I want to work with this owner or with this GC in this particular project too.
And then is it safe to say that some of the larger, more progressive owners are also, I guess a better way to say this is that if you're unwilling to look at some more innovative project delivery methods, you may not be at the table with some project owners. Is that correct?
That's certainly the way some of our owners are seeing it, and that's, I think, one of their incentives for getting involved with LCI is exactly that. They want to get up on a step to the point where they are a sought after client out there in markets where they're competing for the best talent.
Sure. So you're if you want to stay at the table, then you need to be open to lean design and construction, and probably even look at IPD. I know a few years ago I was working with a large utility company in the Southeast, and they were looking at IPD and lean construction for some of their projects because they saw the benefit from the owner side. Well, we're moving along. We're about 30 minutes or so into this. I wanted to see if you could tell us a little bit about some case studies, some real life applications of some projects that have used this approach and how it turned out, maybe some of the challenges they faced or some of the successes they experienced. Can you tell us a little bit about some real life case studies?
Sure. One that comes immediately to mind was one that I learned about really just last year as I was starting to delve into working at LCI, and that was a project in the Orlando area that was underway under general contractor Batson Cook, and they're Georgia based, but they do a lot of work throughout the Southeast. This particular project was a residential tower building with 15,000 square foot floors, and they decided to self-perform as a concrete contractor. So rather than do the standard practice, which is, you set up your forms, you do your reinforcing, you deal with your utilities, and then you pour 15,000 square foot floor, finish that one off, and then move to the next one. They were looking for a more efficient way to go about this because in a 4 or 5 day exercise from reinforcement and framing to pouring, at any given time, people were going to be idled because they didn't have work to do until the next phase of the pour was over. So what they did instead was, kind of counterintuitively, they divided the 15,000 square foot pour into 5,000 foot chunks, and each day they would set up for those pours, and each day you'd be able to keep the framers and the utility workers and the folks doing the steel reinforcement, etc. At roughly the same time of the day, doing their work each day, and then at the end of the day, the trucks would come in and they'd pour that 5,000 square foot section, and they move to the next one and the next one. And as it turns out, by taking smaller bites at the work, the crews were kept in constant motion. They were always following right behind each other. And instead of being some of them down for 2 or 3 days at a time without having anything to do, they were daily being able to utilize their craft. And as it turns out, the building went up months earlier than would otherwise have been the case, and millions of dollars cheaper. And it was a noticeable productivity improvement on the part of even laymen. They noticed this building was going up a lot faster than most that they'd seen in the Orlando area. So that's one where I think, again, utilizing lean tools and techniques, that they got some real productivity gains.
Excellent. No, that is definitely counterintuitive, but it sounds like they looked at it more from a manufacturing process of what would it take to keep people working every day consistently, exactly. And they ended up with a better result.
The other one I'll mention is not so much a case study of a project, but it's a case study of a company, and that is a group called Universal Health Services. They're an owner organization. They develop healthcare facilities and they build hospitals and other patient bed facilities. And they made a substantial commitment to lean back in the 2008-2009 timeframe, and have kind of consistently approached it and applied it since then on their projects around the country. And what they've seen up through last year, they did a study of 50 projects, and they were in some cases as small as $1 million and others up to $150 million. 97% were completed on or under budget. The worst overrun they had was 3%, which they considered to be pretty good compared to traditional practice. And they drove the installed cost of beds down for similar projects from about $230,000 per bed to $175K over 4 years. So better than a 20% reduction in cost. And they've improved safety. They've created better value decisions where they could, reallocate investment if they wanted to. The predictability of outcomes was great. And again, no more headaches and stomach aches, as I mentioned earlier. Just to kind of crystallize that with one project, they did a project called the Temecula Valley Hospital out in California. They finished it 40% below market costs based on their projections. Labor was twice as efficient as in most projects that they've studied, and their operational efficiency was increased as well by 30%. So, and then they threw in some other comments that it was exceptional teamwork and a lot of fun. Which is an intangible, but it sure is nice to be able to have fun while you're doing a great productive job like that.
Yeah, those are words you typically don't hear at the end of a project. It was a lot of fun. And in some cases, it's I never want to see those SOBs again, or I hope I never work with that engineer, or something to that effect.
Exactly. And just as an aside, one thing I'll mention that it's a shame in one sense that the construction approach to lean is so different than manufacturing, and I think that emanates largely from the fact that once you really get up to speed and you're doing a great job of driving up your productivity and driving out waste, eventually the project ends, you deliver the building, and that team may never get together again.
Right.
So it's a lot different than manufacturing, where they're consistently improving the same team on the same line, doing more and more things. So that's the challenge we've got. We're trying to build capacity on a market basis, so that teams can come together. They may not have worked together before, but they've all had some lean experience, and that'll really, I think, give people a leg up in realizing the value of the project.
Definitely. Well, listen, we are out of time, Dan. I really appreciate you taking the time. This has been great information. I've got a page and a half of notes, and I'll probably have more as I go back through this. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about your organization or about lean construction that you think we should know about?
Sure. Again, go to the website. We'd love to get anybody involved and help you on your lean journey if we can. There are resources that you can find in terms of consulting help, in terms of ways to get involved at the local level. Many of these opportunities are low or no cost. It's just a matter of going out and attending some meetings and doing some networking. So happy to have people get involved with us.
Great. And is your organization an international organization?
We are in the process now of encouraging other LCI-like organizations to be created around the world, and some places they're there already, and other places we're working with them to do that. We're probably going to take the tack of encouraging the development of sister organizations as opposed to becoming international ourselves, but we do have some international members already.
Okay, great. We've got a few listeners from around the world, so if you're interested in getting involved and pioneering a sister organization, then go to leanconstruction.org and find some contact information there. I assume you have a contact form where folks can fill it out and send it in with their contact information and get a response back.
We do, and they can also reach out to me, and I'll try to plug them into what's happening overseas if that's helpful.
Well, that sounds great. Well, Dan, this has been incredibly helpful, very informative, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you, Todd.
Well, I hope you got something out of that interview with Dan Heinemeier of the Lean Construction Institute. I know I certainly did. Going forward, if you want some more information about this, I would encourage you to go to constructionleadingedge.com/014 or simply constructionleadingedge.com/lean. And what I've done is put together a free resource guide that has a lot of the information that we talked about and even more details on lean construction principles available for you. Put your name and email address in there and you'll get access to that for free. The other thing that I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the podcast is a resource for people who are still struggling with tracking time for their hourly employees. I've got some good friends at T-Sheets, and you can find them at www.tsheets.com, and they have a fantastic time tracking software for hourly employees. It's online based. It allows people to clock in using text messages from their phone. It also has a really slick smartphone app, and the people are fantastic. I highly recommend it. I've used their service for the last few years, and it was and continues to be a game changer for the operation that I manage. So find out more information about that. You can go to constructionleadingedge.com/T-sheets and check them out. I think they'll be a big help for you. A couple other things before we wrap up. I wanted to let you know what's in the pipeline. A couple of podcasts that I'm working on. One is deep dive into the psychology of success and talking about the limiting beliefs and the stuff that's going on inside our heads that keep us stuck and keep us from going to the next level. I'm also working on an interview with the owner of one of the most successful woman-owned construction businesses in the Southeast. I think that'll be really informative, and I'm looking forward to that one as well. And then other things in the pipeline that I'm working on the Construction Leading Edge Leadership Bootcamp. It's going to be a course for up-and-coming leaders, new leaders in the construction industry, to talk about leadership basics, some tactics and strategies and mindset stuff that I think will really help people get off the ground and move up to the next level in leadership. So if you're a young leader, or if you have young and upcoming leaders in your organization, or you just want to get some more training and have access to some more resources on this topic, then I would encourage you to go to constructionleadingedge.com/join, put your information in there, and you'll have access to updates as they come out, and maybe even have some access to some early bird discounts. You never know. Well, that puts another episode in the books. Until next time.